changes you've seen in yourself over the week based on this class?
I'm more mindful in like when I need clothes to, in ordering and that. I have been for a little while, but with this class a little bit more
That's
mindful.
wonderful. I think that's really a great way to phrase it. I think that's really what Linda said is really almost the key. So we're discussing and discussing and discussing things, and we move very slowly and lots of details. And really, the goal is exactly what Linda just said, to become mindful. That's a really beautiful way to put it, meaning that I was thinking sort of like when I take my son to speech therapy, right? So you schlep, I have to drive to the school, I have to pick him up, then I have to drive to the therapy, and then you have to wait. And then the therapy that's officially supposed to be an hour, then sort of officially becomes 45 minutes, and then they come late and they leave early. So you feel in the end you got maybe 35 minutes with the therapist, and then you have to schlep back. But I'm like, what's the gain in that? Not the 30 to 35 minutes he had with his therapist. It's making me more mindful. So all week, I'm more focused on his speech. I'm the therapist. I'm the one focused on his speech. I'm the one, making sure he's working on it and all that wonderful stuff. So I think that's really a huge point, what Linda's saying. When we're mindful, it's not stuff we don't know. It's not stuff we don't want to do. We want to do God's will. We're committed to doing God's will. It's just like reminding us, reminding us, reminding us. So it gets into the beat of our day, that as we make clothes choices, ordering online choices, looking in our closet choices, how we wear what we wear in our closet choices, we just have that little beat of modesty, somewhere deep in our psyche of modesty. And then we do things differently because of that. So a lot of times that is a little huge step. And really, really, in a sense, the goal is that mindfulness, that constant awareness. Natalie?
Well, my son is here and he has a question too.
Why do we have to follow God's will?
Why do we have to follow God's will? Well, that's a great question. We have to follow God's will because He's the creator, we're the creation, and this is how He, as a creator who made us and knows what's best for us, wants us to behave. And then there's the extra added bonus that when we follow His will, we get to connect to Him. We connect to be one with Him. So He's God, He's a creator, and we're creation. So I'm small, He's huge. How can small and huge become one? When we do what He wants, when we follow His will, that will is really the connecting point between me and Him. So when I do it as He wants, following His will, the commandments that He commanded us, I get this amazing gift that I'm one with God. Great question.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Any other thoughts or awareness over the week? All right, so let's keep going. So we were talking about God's will, as we were just saying, to be modest. And a person could really say, well, this isn't unique to Judaism, so to speak. You could say Muslim women are covered, or nuns are covered. And what's going on that we're, how are we looking at that in the context of our discussion? So I think there's two important points to understand. I think it's very important to really, really clarify in your head. On one hand, Christianity or Islam and their view of modesty as versus Judaism, God's will of modesty, it's a completely different situation, not at all the same. Of course, you know the Christian story very well. The body is ugly, the body is defiled, primordial sin, women are evil, intimacy is evil, all of that. You want to be really holy, be a nun, be a priest, a monk, and be separate from the world because the whole world is evil and messed up. Just be God's. That's not God's world. That's not Judaism's perspective at all. We view that God gave us a beautiful physical world, which we were given to give to Him through our service. We're supposed to be beautiful, modest and beautiful. We're speaking a lot about the idea of covering your hair. So Lubavitcher Rebbe, when he speaks about covering your hair, he always says with a wig, and he always says it should be a beautiful wig. A woman should be attractive, not attracting inappropriately, but attractive, beautiful. Physical is beautiful when it's done within God's paradigm, with this person at this time, in this way, is beautiful. It's not ugly, it's not sinful, it's not crass, it's beautiful. So that's the foundational difference if we're saying, oh, laws of modesty, like everyone. No, not at all. Very, very different from the skewed vision that you're probably familiar with. That's on one level. On the other level, we could look at it from another perspective and say many cultures have rules or perspectives of modesty. Hopefully bankers are not walking around in shorts. When the lawyer's in court, they're going to put on a blazer, a jacket. There's rules of how the stewardesses are supposed to dress. Meaning this idea that a human is more dignified when they're covered is innate to humans. We're told that if God didn't give us rules, we could learn various things from the animals. And we're told we could learn modesty from the cats. So that means, on one hand, as we're saying, no, this is God's way. This is very different than looking at the world as horrible and evil and sinful, and that's why we're covering it up. Totally different perspective. On the other hand, the concept of modesty, yes, that is innate to creation, and we should see it in any moral person. There should be some perspective of how a person, man and woman, should treat their body in a way that's reflective that the body was made in God's image, that the body has dignity, that the body has worth, and therefore treat it with modesty is significant enough to be covered. Any thoughts on those ideas? Again, from your background, how you're processing them?
I had a feeling it was modesty for different reasons. I do appreciate the clear explanation. I really wish there was like a clear Noahide style. I feel like there's a Hasidic style, there's a LDS style, there's a Muslim style, right? There's nuns. Like you can easily identify these things from the style. We Noahides don't have one yet.
You're creating your own. But you understand the point I'm making in terms of the Christian, and for that matter, Islamic perspective as versus this concept of modesty. How the Noahide's looking at modesty, how the Jew is looking at modesty. Not modesty because the body's ugly, not modesty because the body's evil. The body's beautiful. God made a beautiful world and gave us beautiful bodies. Modesty because that's God's will, that we should treat these beautiful bodies with dignity and respect. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on that?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching a program, and it's interesting. You had mentioned Muslims and the different thought between the burqa and just the head covering and that, and between that and people that wear stuff that doesn't leave much to the imagination. And that, and some of that, what they were saying is and I've heard this also, that's why in Orthodoxy, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the women are separated for the men so that the men can concentrate more on prayer than, looking over and seeing or, talking to their spouse or whatnot.
You're saying in synagogue?
Yeah, that kind of thing is and I always, forgive me if I can't think of the word right now, but with all the praying that men do and that it seemed how it was explained to me, couldn't control themselves in that. And I know that's not what it is. It's more that that's the time and place to concentrate on God and with the prayers and stuff like that. Could you speak to that?
So there's a lot. There's so many different aspects to that question. It's a great question, and that could be one answer. Meaning everything's very multifaceted. It's very nuanced, and there's layers and layers and layers of reasons for everything. So yeah, you could say in a very simple way, and it's valid. It's legit. I hear it. If men and women were together in the prayers, men or women could be distracted from God and think about other people in the room. And if they're separated, they can focus on God. That makes sense. There's many other levels of reasoning. In other words, in general, the synagogue was really much more viewed as the man's space than the woman's, maybe until recent time when maybe it's more natural for women to go to pray. But even then, even a very devout woman probably only goes on the Sabbath to pray. And a devout man goes 3 times a day. A man doesn't have to, but really is supposed to pray 3 times a day with a quorum. So he's going to synagogue 3 times a day. Or he's going twice, and then in the afternoon, he just goes to the afternoon prayer and then waits like the hour or so and then studies and then does the evening prayer. I don't know of any devout woman that does that. A devout woman probably doesn't even usually go Friday night. She usually goes Shabbos day. So a devout woman maybe once a week goes to synagogue, and a devout man goes 3 times a day every single day. So I think that already shows you that the concept of synagogue is very different for a man and for a woman. And this really goes back to the real, foundational perspective of the woman, that she is called the mainstay of the home. And as such, this is her domain, this is her palace, this is where she reigns, and this is where she's serving God and nurturing the next generation, that they too will go out and serve God, both in the home and in the synagogue. If you want to get deeper and more Kabbalistic to understand it, a woman is the energy. There's 10 godly manifestations called Kabbalistically Sfirot, 10 godly expressions of self. The lowest of the 10 is sovereignty, and that is the energy of the woman. Now, it's the lowest and it's sovereignty, which is an interesting concept. And again, there's so much I can say on all this. I'm trying to just sort of stick to your question and give you some background to understand it. This idea of the lowest being sovereignty shows this concept of what sovereign seemingly is lowest, but it should be highest. It's sovereign, but it seems lowest. That's the energy of the woman. That's also actually the energy of the Jew versus the rest of the world. That's the energy of the moon versus the sun. The Jew, the woman, the moon are all like sovereignty. Sovereignty is a recipient. We're told Kabbalistically, sovereignty has nothing of herself. Everything that she has, she was given by sovereignty, by the 9 higher godly traits. The woman by the man, the moon by the sun, the Jews by the non-Jewish world. So this is the concept of ultimately being the receiver, the moon, the Jew, the woman, sovereignty, and actually King David was the embodiment of sovereignty, are all recipients. All don't have of their own and all receive. As it says that David actually was supposed to be a stillborn. He had no years, and Adam saw this, and Adam gave 70 of his, he was supposed to live 1,000 years, and he gave 70 of the 1,000 years to David. So Adam lived, instead of 1,000 years, 930, and David got 70 years. But then the forces of evil got involved, and that got nixed too. And then Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph all chipped in their years to create the 70 years that David had. So David had nothing of his own. He didn't even have life of his own. He's the embodiment of sovereignty. And yet from David came the sovereignty of David, and ultimately the Redeemer. Mashiach himself is the Davidic Redeemer. So this is the lowest trait that really is the highest energy. And that's why it says that by the redemption, by Mashiach, we'll see that this is all an upside down world. And what's high is low, and what's low is high. And sovereignty, which seems the lowest of the traits, will be revealed as the highest. And that's why it says, for the times of the redemption of Mashiach, the verse says, Eshes Chayla Teres Baila. A woman of valor is the crown of her husband, crown meaning over, on top of, supreme, beyond, which our world hasn't shown that. In Judaism, there's a lot of written in respect for women, but otherwise really hasn't shown that at all. But we will see that, the whole world will see that by Mashiach. So all of this is to explain to you the nature of a woman. The nature of a woman is the idea of sovereignty, which is the idea of the receiver, the receiving energy. In the Hebrew, you call it the mekabel, the one that receives, the one that nurtures. The man is the mashpia. He's the outward bound one. The woman is the receiver, the inward bound one. That's why in Jewish law, for Jews, a Jew is determined by mother, not by father. A Jewish father and a non-Jewish woman, the child's not Jewish. A Jewish woman and a not Jewish father, it's not a great situation, but the child is Jewish, 100% Jewish. Why? Because women are the receivers. So they can receive and nurture this godly soul and maintain it for those 9 months. A man doesn't have that ability. So a Jewish man, if he will be drawing down godly energy in the conception of a child, he has no ability to hold it. His energy is outward. A woman's energy is inward. So since the man's energy is the conqueror, the outward bound, that's why for him, he needs the synagogue as that place going out and connecting to God. For a woman, she's the nurturer. She's inward bound. She's maintaining and containing. And that's why for her, she doesn't need that. It doesn't hurt. Some women love to go to synagogue. I love to go to synagogue. But it's like extra, because that's not really where my energy is shining. So that was like a much deeper explanation, but it was a third level I gave you because all three work, all three are correct, and they all work together. So continuing this idea, it is a very serious transgression for women to dress immodestly. There are many sources for this. There's many biblical prohibitions that are violated by a woman dressing immodestly. And it says that immodesty causes the divine presence to depart, right? Like we discussed when we first started talking about this, that the original source of modesty is soldiers, right? If you remember the soldiers that have to carry a shovel among their equipment, that if they would, need to, as we would say, use the bathroom, they have a shovel to dig and cover that excrement. Why? Because God's in your camp. You have to be modest. Having excrement on the field is not modest. It would push God away. So violating the laws of modesty causes the divine presence to depart. Violating the laws of modesty violates Torah, can cause others to transgress, as a man cannot see a woman dressed inappropriately, and causes God's presence to depart. On the other side, in terms of the positives, what we're accomplishing, because it's good to focus on the positives, when we dress modestly, and Danielle mentioned this, I think, from our first class, this very important point, we give our children the gift of modesty as the norm. Now, for all of you, much more even than for religious Jews, of course, for religious Jews, your children still have devices and see what's on the streets, but how much more so is it a challenge for a Noahide? Because they're not going to see modesty on the streets. We know that. They're not going to see modesty anywhere probably except in your home. So when you make in your home this enclave where modest is norm, ideally from their roots, this is their roots. This is their youth. This is how they envision the world. This is what they will go back to. And again, I'm not saying this is uniquely significant for a Noahide. I think any mother today needs to be very, very focused on this. I just feel it's almost especially challenging for a Noahide because there's no support system really besides your home. And that's why it's so important for all your children, boys and girls, that modesty is very, very substantive. It's something that we really feel the substance of it, really feel the strength of it, really feel the power of it, really feel the beauty of it. Also, when we dress modestly in our home, we're respecting God. You can say, well, I don't have any kids around, so that's not relevant to me. The first point, maybe not. But respecting God is relevant to all of us at all ages and stages. God gave us the body in his image. We respect it when we treat it appropriately. So that's a very important point because a person could say, well, I live alone. Yeah, obviously I went outside. I would want to present myself appropriately, but in my own house, what difference does it make? My body is in the image of God. That's what we're told. And we're respecting God's image by dressing modestly as he wills. Now, of course, we're having this whole discussion because modesty is applicable to Noahides. On what basis, where do we see this concept of modesty in the Noahide laws? Well, it's under the prohibition of, obviously, immorality, one of the 7 overarching laws. Every woman is obligated to act and dress in a modest way and not cause others to sin through her dressing and acting in a way that brings them to sinful thoughts and closer to sinful actions. And this is based on the biblical law in Leviticus. You should not put a stumbling block before the blind. In other words, since a man has a number of obligations, when you dress inappropriately, you can bring them to sin, and this is a sin. And there's 2 sources that say that this is equally applicable to non-Jews. One is a source called Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and one in the Targum Yonasan on Genesis chapter 6, verse 2. Expressing this point, it's written that, of course, the world's most sinful moment was prior to the flood. The great flood destroyed all but less than 10 people in the entire world, right? Noach and his wife Naamah. He had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, Yafes, and their wives. Those are 8 people. And the Midrash says that, this great giant held on to the ark and was saved. That would be 9. An entire world destroyed exclusive of 8 or 9 people. How sinful were the people that this is what God did, that he had to literally wash them away. So it says that the women of this time, before God just washed away the whole world, they used to walk around, this is how it's expressed, revealed below their waist, like naked below their waist. And that's why they were punished by the flood. You could say, well, the men were the ones that abused them, kidnapped, violated. Yes, the men did all of these things. But when the women are walking around so immodest, their actions, their dress, are making them, in a sense, partners in the sins that were perpetuated, partners in the sins that were perpetrated. In other words, you're walking around naked and then you're arousing these men, and then these men do very violent, aggressive, horrible things to you. But what are you dressed like that for? What's not? We're not whitewashing the men of that generation. What we're saying is, it's not saying so therefore it was okay what they did. It's saying that a woman has to recognize her responsibility and how she should behave. And it's very interesting. Again, we're obviously it's a non-Jewish world, and there's no concept of Jew at this point in the world, and still, this was considered transgression of the modesty, how a person is supposed to behave. And it's very strong that this, again, there are other opinions as well as what were the sins that led to the flood. This is a very, very strong voice of the immodesty, which again, from which we derive that there's an obligation by God for us to be modest. If immodesty would cause the flood, then that means God is saying we need to be modest. So any woman above 12 should wear modest clothing. What does modest clothing mean? That it covers her whole torso until her collarbones, front and back, her legs until covering the knees, her arms covering the elbows. And that is the obligation for a Jewish woman and for a Noahide woman. And conversely, if a person is immodest in public, it's really expressing an attitude of disbelief in God. Why is it expressing an attitude of disbelief in God? Because there's a God you're supposed to be respecting. When a person says, I don't need to dress that way, I could dress how I want, and how I feel comfortable, and how I feel good about myself, and you shoved God out of the window. You said he doesn't exist, and his will is irrelevant. Also, it's expressing a disbelief that God is watching the actions of man. It's expressing a disbelief that man is created in God's image. When someone's walking around barely dressed, as unfortunately, maybe not now because it's colder, but definitely in the summer, a lot of people in this world walk around barely dressed. It's like they're viewing themselves like animals. Animals are shameless, right? Animals have no shame. Animal has no need for clothing. Our sages say if a human is walking around with barely any clothing, they're denigrating themselves to the level of an animal. What are these quotes? And really everything I'm saying here is straight from the sages. What are these thoughts? How do you relate to them? How does it make you feel or think? We just said that if a person is dressed very immodestly, very immodestly, as many people are in the summer, we said it's a disbelief in God, because you're saying there's no God there that you have to respect, because if you're respecting God, you don't be dressed this way. It's a disbelief that God's watching your actions. It's a disbelief that you're created in God's image. It's a perspective of the human as another animal, because animals don't need clothing. Those four concepts, how do you understand them? Do you see that? Do you not see that? Does anyone resonate more than the others?
Yeah, I think the idea that being immodest can give that idea that you don't respect God or believe in God. That's interesting. Hadn't really thought of it that way, or that you don't believe in God. That's an interesting thought.
Right, because we wouldn't necessarily make that connection ourselves. I'm like, okay, this is how I'm dressing, and what's it got to do with anything?
Right. Yeah, that makes it more powerful because, of course, we don't want people to think that.
Right, and we don't want to do something that would express that. Exactly.
Of course, of course.
Exactly. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on this? Because yes, that's why I'm asking for your thoughts, because I could imagine that for most of us, we wouldn't like connect the fact that my shirt is too loose, or I mean, again, this is really talking about people that are dressed much more modestly than that, you know. But like I'm saying, very typical. If you walk on any street in America in the summer, you'll see a lot of people walking what our sages mean, you know, what our sages are referring to. So it's not really like, you know, you thought your collarbone was covered, but the shirt got stretched out, so your collarbone's not covered, that, oh, you're disrespecting God. You know, it doesn't really mean that, because it's not disrespecting God. You didn't realize your shirt was stretched out. It means someone's making a conscious choice to dress in very, very, very little. And then what attitudes are they expressing? Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, I'd like to make this practical. I know we've had a number of classes on this, and today is going to be our last one. So I'd really like to practically turn the spotlight on everyone. How, and I loved what Linda said in the beginning, that she said she's more mindful. And I really think being mindful is the key to like everything. Like if you want to eat properly, it's so hard to eat properly because you have to remember it every minute you're awake. You know, imagine you're eating properly all day, and then it's like 11 o'clock at night and you just space out, and then oops, what did you eat and how bad was that for you? I was good all day. I was good for 20 hours. Whatever, it does make a difference. You still messed yourself up. You know, someone's being really not wanting to gossip. And they're like, oh, so many things they were tempted by, but no, they constrain themselves. And then like they just forgot. And here their ears or their mouth, and like they didn't even realize what was happening. So mindfulness is honestly the key to like so many things that we're working on and need to change. So it's a wonderful, wonderful attainment. Practically, after these weeks, I think this, I don't know, might be our third or fourth class on this. I think it's our fourth. What can you say that you would like to strive for in terms of, based on the heightened mindfulness and all the classes and thoughts and Torah thoughts on this, how could you upgrade and give God more in the realm of modesty?
It's definitely brought it back into focus. It was something that I had focused on a lot before we had kids. It wasn't something that I had totally disregarded like during pregnancy and nursing, but at the same time, it was kind of like you wear what you can get and do the best you can with what you got. Whereas these 3 weeks, it's definitely brought it all back into the forefront of the focus again.
Well, I mean, speaking of nursing, that's a really great concept within modesty, because one can make sure they only nurse in their bedroom with the door closed, or one could go, or there's many, many other levels after that, you know, and that's a big point of modesty, how sensitive we are to, is my flesh
Which is so
exposed?
funny. It's definitely something that people are trying to they call it, you know, like normalize it because it's a normal thing. It's like it is a normal thing. You know, a woman shouldn't be ashamed because she's, you know, nursing a baby, but it's how you do
That
it
doesn't
makes
mean
it
you openly do it in public. That would be
right.
like
And it's
going
like
to the bathroom is a normal thing, so you can do that openly in public. Yeah.
exactly. And it's like how you do it, the
Yeah.
way that you do it.
Yeah.
The excuse, if you want to call it, that I always gave was like I'm so covered because everybody has a phone now, and if you're at the playground with the other kids and there's other parents, you don't want to be in the background of somebody's photo, you know, messing around and whatever. So it's like I always wear a cover, and I have, you know, a lot of coverage when I'm doing it. And so it's just stuff like that where it's yeah, the people are trying to maybe have good intentions and that, like, have facilities for mothers that are nursing, but sometimes maybe miss the boat.
Right. No, it's definitely like the type of thing where it's so easy to just, like you're saying, it's natural. I'm not embarrassed. Blah blah blah. But then there's, it's very hard to do with that in public. That there's no exposure of your skin. As a mother of 11, of course, it's been a while. It's been a while. My youngest is 12, but as a mother of 11 who, thank God, nursed, for many, 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 many years, I definitely reached a point. And I didn't have it in the beginning. I mean, I was like, I'm totally covered. I would never, obviously, obviously I wouldn't do anything outside. But I'm saying, even in my home, if my children are around or something, I'm totally covered. Obviously, I'm totally covered. And it took me a while to come to that point of sensitivity of saying, even if I think I'm totally covered, you know what? There's totally and there's totally. And it just felt like a lack of modesty. It just felt like it's something that I should do in my bedroom. As an expression of modesty, children can come to my bedroom. That's true, but it's different than me being in the living room. Again, I'm not putting that on anyone, but definitely just the whole arena of nursing is definitely something that could be a challenge and an area of opportunity in modesty. But so Natalie's saying, like Linda, that it's awareness. It's making her think about it. It's reminding her. And that's, of course, what we do when we learn things that officially we already know. So what are we learning it for? Because there's, in Hebrew, it's not in Hebrew, in the Yiddish language, there's two words for hear. Heron and der Heron. Heron means to hear, and der Heron means to internalize what you hear, integrate what you hear, really hear it on the inside. So when we learn something that we know, we're trying to der Heron, to really get it inside.
I like that. I like
And
that.
I feel like
So
as
many
you're,
times I
oh, I'm
just-
sorry.
There's so many times I hear stuff and it's kind of like it goes over your head. You're kind of partially hearing, but to know that you hear and then take it within.
Mm-hmm. And it's a process. And sometimes we need to hear something several times before we can take it within, because we heard it. Oh, that was weird. Did I hear that right? And we heard it a second time and a third time. And for some of us, it could take many, many times, but each time something's being accomplished. It's like another drop, another drop, another drop, and then click. We integrated it. And it's only because of all the times that we were hearing it that we got to the point of integration. Danielle?
Unicorn.
I was just going to say, and similarly to that, how it applies to, your current stage in life or wherever you are. And, like we were just talking about nursing, for example. For some people that doesn't apply. And then of course for me and Natalie right now, it's very real. So it's, you think about it and you maybe not learned anything new, but from your current perspective. So for me, I've been trying to focus on what are you trying to do, baby? Oh, okay. Um, Modesty around the home. We kind of talked about that a few weeks ago. So that's something versus just when we're outside. So
Right. That's a tremendous enhancement. Like we're saying, you want your home to be so real and strong and absolute, unwavering in modesty, so your children get it as like a free gift. This is how you're supposed to behave, because everything in the world is going to rip away at it. So you want that to be very, very strong anchor. Like this is no questions. This is it. This is always how we behave. This is all they've seen, all they know, all they process as how, their parents, who are ultimately their world, saying this is how you behave. So it's really important and a very, very good to just focus on, like, yes, modesty in the home. That's really good, really important. And then each child, wherever they're holding, to try that they should also be modest. If modesty for the child means getting dressed in the bathroom, not in the bedroom, something like that, where it's a level of modesty. You're not changing clothes in the bedroom, anyone else could walk in, that wouldn't be appropriate. So you change in the bathroom because that's more modest. Something like that, just to inculcate in the child the vision of modesty. We don't walk around like that, whatever that is. Maybe in a bedroom you could wear that, but you're not going to walk around in the house like that. Why not? Because it's not modest. It's not how God wants us to be. It's not how God wants us to dress. It's not how God wants us to present ourselves. We're his children. We have to dress as befitting of him. So, you start thinking about it both for yourself and for your children in terms of what is going to give them also, not just how they see me, but themselves, that inner vision of the significance of modesty. That's part of them in their personal relationship to God. Sometimes it's hard because you can't think, what are you not doing? But I always feel in something like modesty, there's limitless upgrades. There's limitless sensitivity. And as we said, it might be in dress. It might be in our refinement of speech. It might be in the words we allow ourselves to think. It might be in what we allow ourselves to watch or to read or to hear. These are all part of modesty. It might be in how the rules we set for ourselves in terms of our interacting with men. Of course, there's a concept of, we discussed the idea of yichud, not being alone with a man. Now that's also part of modesty. I had this recently twice. It's interesting, twice in like 1 week. I had, for whatever medical reason, I had a test on Thursday. And so it was a man. He was a tech. He brought me into the room. Of course, he closed the door. And I right away felt like, oh my gosh, this doesn't feel right. Even though, of course, I know I'm in a hospital and it's a public place and the door's not locked and anyone could walk in at any time. Happens to be my husband was not in the city at the time. That's a general cover if your husband's in the city. My husband was not. And I really felt very uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, I said, no, I got to say something. And I said to the man, I said, probably you can, but could you leave the door open? And he said, no. He said, even if the door would stay open, it's not allowed because there's radiation in the room, so that would be forbidden. So like, why? Or maybe I said, oh, it's my religious, based on my religion, I really don't want to be alone in a room with a man. So like if the door was open, then that would be acceptable. He said, no, it can't be open. But then I don't know if he suggested or something. Okay, he said, well, if I had another man or woman in the room, would it work? I said, oh, yes, a woman, not another man. That would not help at all. But I said, if you had another woman in the room with me, that would work. And he went out and he got another woman, a woman, meaning me and others, another. And she was in the room the whole time. And I was so impressed with him that he appreciated my sensitivities, that he was sensitive to that. And I felt like so good that so to speak, I passed that test. And that was on Thursday. And then yesterday, it wasn't like a real test. I guess it was just like, talking about being aware. I was visiting my mother-in-law with my son, Beryl. And happens to be that my brother-in-law is in town from Israel, visiting his mother. And then I think even my brother-in-law went out to the afternoon prayer. Yeah, he went out to the afternoon prayer. So it was me, my mother-in-law, and Beryl. And then my mother-in-law and Beryl were taking a walk in the hall of the building of her condo. Fine. I stayed and I'm saying Psalms. And then my brother-in-law walks in. And then right away, thank God that I remembered, I'm like, whoa, this is not allowed. So I said to him, obviously he's religious, so he understood. I said, well, I said I'm not going to go leave the door open, because although I thought if I leave it open and don't tell him, he might think, oh, the door's open by mistake and he's going to go close it. I'd go leave the door open because this is it's a forbidden situation. The two of us being alone in the apartment. He's like, oh yeah, you're right. And I went and I opened the door and, all was fine. But it was, it's just like Linda said, it's the same idea of being mindful, being aware, remembering. Again, especially like with my brother-in-law, it was no big deal. I had no fears of telling him, or not at all, like whatever, it's law. But it's so easy to not realize, to not remember. So same thing, it's just an example. I'm giving other examples, like modesty is not only covering our collarbones front and back and our elbows and our knees and not wearing anything loud or too bright or tight fitting, that's part of it. And if you can't think of any upgrade in that area, there's all the other areas of modesty as well. So I think in serving God, it's never ending. So Natalie, your son sent a question. I did see that. Let me get it. David wants to ask why Abraham gave 70 years to David. So he didn't give 70 years. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph chipped in. The four of them together gave 70 years. Why did they give 70 years? because they saw that, again, David is the embodiment of God's sovereignty. He's the ultimate king, beginning the line of kings that comes to its complete fruition in the Messiah, in Mashiach. So he's the ultimate beginning of what ultimately culminates in the Redeemer himself, as we call it, the Davidic King Messiah, the Davidic King Mashiach. So he sort of needs to be, he needs to live, to begin the lineage that will ultimately culminate in redemption, in Mashiach, in the Messiah. But because of that, there was a lot of pressures from the forces of evil to not give David life. And that's what, and there's so much and much and much we could talk about the story of David, and not giving him life is just one of the many things the forces of evil tried to do to not let his light shine. So because of that, because of this interplay, it says that David was supposed to be a stillborn, which means he would never live. So Adam, the first man, who was the second greatest person of all times, like Adam has a bad rap, people don't realize that he was literally the second greatest soul of all time, second only to the Mashiach, the Messiah himself. So Adam saw in the future David being born a stillborn, and he knew he had to live. He has to be. He's the beginning of the line of kings that will culminate in Mashiach and the Messiah. So he personally said to God, 70 years of my life give to him. So he lived 930 years instead of 1,000, which would have been the perfect completion of life, so that David should live. But then more forces of evil got involved and fought that. So to speak, David again lost, and he still wouldn't have life. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph all saw this, and they all chipped in. They didn't have as many years as Adam, so they couldn't afford any one of them to give 70, but they each gave a certain number that together became 70, and this gave David 70 years. Why specifically 70, if that was your question? Because 70 is considered the completion of the natural order. Like that's why a week is this weird number, 7 days. And basically throughout humanity, a week has been 7 days, really modeled off of God creating the world in 7 days. So 7 is like the number that expresses the world. 10 is completion, right? Nice round number, tens. So 7 times 10 is 70. So 70 is the number that expresses completion within the natural world. And that was the number of years, therefore, that David received to live, and he lived for exactly 70 years. And he passed away on the holiday of Shavuos. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? Any other questions?
I have a question. I have a neighbor across from me, and he's older than I. And a couple of times he has been taken to the hospital, 911 thing and that. And thank goodness they got him away home and that. But like he knows he needs surgery on his eyes and that. And his daughter has her own health issues. Now, is it wrong of me to offer to drive him? I understand being alone and that and getting rights and that. And if a Noahide is supposed to be, a change in the world and that, and to give that time to like be of service, to take him to an appointment or whatnot, is that still
That's
okay?
an excellent question. You're saying, can you help this elderly gentleman? He's a man and you're a woman. Could you be alone in the car with him? You could if it was by daylight, or if it's in the early evening when there's still a lot of traffic on the streets. But if it would be later at night, I don't know the area where you live, but if it's later at night where there's really not so many cars on the streets, no. But if it's daytime, if it's daylight and there's traffic on the streets, absolutely no problem.
It has to be daylight because I don't like driving at night.
Good. Okay, so then you got no problem. If it's daytime and because we have light, because it's daylight, and also daytime is the time when we assume other people are around.
Yeah.
So you're not secluded. If you were taking him on this lonely country road where it would just be the two of you, it would be a problem. But if you're in the city driving around, the assumption is there's plenty of other people there and it's daylight, so everything's very visible. So then it would be fine. But that would be the same concept. Like can you be in a taxi with a man, like you're a female and it's a male driver? It depends. Again, if it's daylight and the city streets, no problem. If it's night, it's not so good. If it's night, but there's still a lot of traffic and the streets are very well lit up, okay. If the streets are not lit up, if it's a country road, if there's not going to be traffic on the streets, no, not an option.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, but that's a very good question and really expresses this idea of this, again, the sensitivities and subtleties sometimes of the laws of modesty. You want to help? Is this helping the way that God wants me to? So within that paradigm, which is your box, because you're not going to drive at night, perfect. Yes, it's definitely a great service. All right, we will stop at this point. I hope everyone did gain. I hope I gained. I hope we all gained. You know, it's one of these things that the world definitely tries to wear away at and just, you know, tarnish the natural sensitivity we all have, because with every limb of Eve's body, of Chava's body, it was be a modest woman, be a modest woman, be a modest woman. That's us. That's our prototype. So it's really deep, deep, deep in our DNA. It's deep, deep, deep in our very bodies. And the world can try to take it away, but we can say no. We're regaining what we really are. We're going to be modest women. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much.